Welcome to the Thoughtful Software Podcast, the show that's providing technology leaders meaningful insights to drive innovation. Thoughtful Software is not just about tech, it's a movement to make real change. This episode comes to us live from the Bay Area at the SaaStr 2021 conference in San Francisco, where Andrew and Fahad discuss systems of intelligence.
All right, Andrew, it's good to talk to you again. We're back with another episode, but this time we're live at SaaStr 2021 here in sunny California. It's good to have you in California. We're outdoors. It's a great event put on by Jason Lemkin and the crew, so shout out to them. It's been so far amazing. Last few days of great discussions and meeting people in person and live. So that's been quite unusual and fun. How's it been for you?
Oh, it's been a lot of fun. You get to see a lot of the newer SaaS companies coming up here from a lot of the thought leaders in the space. Talk to all the VCs, talk to all the founders. It's just been an incredible time. And I mean, quite frankly, it's been about a year since I've done an in-person event. So the fact that we get to go talk to real live people, not behind a TV or a video screen, has been just simply incredible. So everything's really good all around. Like you said, kudos to Lemkin and the team for putting on such a great show.
And it's amazing to see all the various companies and all various categories, B2C, B2B type companies, systems of records, and we're going to get into all these different types of categories. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about today is systems. It's an interesting topic that we've discussed platforms before on the podcast. I think it's important to talk about the different, categories there are, and there's systems of record, systems of intelligence, systems of engagement. There are differences, and it's important to talk about it. So that's what we're going to discuss today. Maybe we can start off by just kind of defining and laying the foundation out of what are these different systems. Maybe we can start with a system of record. What is a system of record? What type of companies that fall into this category?
Yeah, I think it's important to look at what a system is. And so when we talk about systems here, we're talking about software systems. We're talking about complete systems made up of multiple modules, multiple pieces. And so we're not necessarily talking about the formal definition of a software system. And it's important to note, sometimes we talk about computer science on this podcast. So in the non-formal, system of record is basically a system that creates one or more types of entities in a business and own that record. For example, Salesforce is one of the largest systems record on the planet, both by revenue and adoption. And what that does is it's a CRM, customer relationship management, and it handles all the data and holds all the data with regards to customer relationship. Things like opportunities, leads, accounts, addresses, things like that. They're so important to that particular field. But then there are other types of system of records. When you look at Workday, right? Workday is a system of record when it comes to human resources. So your employee data, payroll data, we can go on that. Some compliance stuff. NetSuite, system of record when it comes to accounting, right? It's an ERP system. It has things like accounts and invoices and revenue recognition schedules and things like that. So we think about system of record, it's any system that creates one or more entities, pieces of data in an organization and owns that, is the master of that particular record.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because I think most of these systems of records, they're focused on internal efficiency and, standardizing business processes, most often historical. They don't necessarily are forward looking. And they don't really deliver a competitive differentiation in the sense, but it's really setting up that functionality and foundation. And talk about why they're so critical to enterprises.
Well, when we think about what system of records do, they're not necessarily a competitive differentiator for companies. It does help organize organizations. It does help people realize that they have data. And we'll get to why data is critical. We all know it, but we'll say it out loud in the coming areas. But the sheer fact of having the data in a digital format, being everyone talking about the same system, everyone interacting with the same data. I mean, it's huge. When you look at legacy and how people used to work, I could write down one piece of information. Someone could write down the same try to write down the same piece of information, and we could have two separate copies that are different and be making decisions based on that. In the new world, we're all looking at the same customer, we're all looking at the same invoice, we're all looking at the same record. And that's really huge when you consider how organizations need to operate. They're bigger than they ever were, they're more distributed than they ever were. So having those systems of records are huge. And it's a moat in the sense it's really hard to switch off a system of record, because if you're Salesforce and all your customers are in there and you have thousands of customers and you have all their address information, all their phone number, you have everything inside that system, it's really hard to switch off of that system because everyone's used to the interface, everyone's used to putting data in there. You've built business processes around these systems that would be hard to unwind and change. And so when we talk about business modes, what makes system of records sticky is that business processes get built around them when it comes to data input and data output, in particular reporting.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, being at SaaStr here, we see so many of the same companies. Like, I don't know how many project management companies that we've seen today or over the last few days. And they're all promoting this idea of like, you can export your data and import it from another system to another. I mean, is it really sticky? And then the other reason is why would there be so many different types of same companies that are, maybe in project management space or sales analytics? I think we saw maybe a dozen analytics companies, sales analytics companies. Like we've talked about, I don't see a big differentiator in any of them.
Well, so we'll talk about systems of engagement, which is what those analytics platforms play into. It's a different type of moat, different type of system. When it comes to why there's multiple types of systems of record, is that people tend to adopt the system that fits best for their target business process. And so when they do that, they can do one or two things. They could spend $10 million, buy a very configurable system like Salesforce and configure it. Or they can find a very prescriptive platform. They don't have to pay to configure it and adopt that into their process because it fits what they're trying to do. And I believe that the markets are so large these days, especially when it comes to software, that when people look at that, they say, hey, yeah, maybe we're only the right solution for, X type of company that's going to have Y type of process. That could still be $1 billion market. And that's what you're seeing a lot of people say. It's fine to be very much a targeted solution because then they're very sticky for that type of business process. In terms of data conversion, anyone telling you that it's point and click data conversion has never done a data conversion. 2 is probably an idiot. And 3 does not understand how enterprises work. Data isn't good in systems. It never was good. And it probably never will be good. And so in that way, when we talk about good data conversions are just point and click, they're full of shit, unless we're talking at like an SMB with 10 employees. And then sure, maybe, but anything of reasonable scale and complexity, it's not point and click and it never will be. And people need to get it out of their minds that it's going to be an easy conversion because it never is. But again, when we talk about business moats, when we talk about system of records in particular, we have to understand that that's part of the moat, is that it is really hard to switch off a system at scale that's already adopted because of data conversion being a chief problem.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you mentioned systems of engagement. So let's take that another level and start talking about more customization and differentiation. Describe systems of engagement. What are those?
So a system of engagement, and oftentimes people get these confused because it's a slightly different modus operandi, if you will, for these systems. But they're the system that people engage with every day to do their job. So when we talk about a system of engagement, we're talking about solutions like Tableau. We're talking about solutions like some of these sales analytics, these revenue management solutions that help prevent churn. We're talking things that would help with revenue operations on the accounting side. There are a lot of solutions in this space. And the idea of it is the reason these are sticky and the reason you would invest in a business as a system of engagement is that the more people use the system, the more they rely on it, the more that it's part of their core function of their job, to the point where you can't do your job without it. And so the idea is that the more screens you can be on, the more ubiquitous you can make your platform and an organization, the more likely that you are to not be replaced. And so Tableau, for example, they have everyone relying on Tableau dashboards, and you need Tableau to view Tableau graphs. And so people have to buy other Tableau desktops and other ways of getting it. So they're able to sell more and more licenses because more and more people need it. And as the ubiquity of the platform expands, everyone's engaging with Tableau. So everyone needs a license. And so they're able to have an element of virility inside organizations. Obviously, there's different levels. If you're a sales opportunity / revenue operations type platform, like a Clary, for example, your opportunity to expand is going to be accounting, maybe marketing, most definitely sales. And so, when you think about where they can go viral, that's really what you're looking at. But that's what a system of engagement is.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I think it's important to differentiate this, because systems of engagement, it's more about controlling the user experience, focusing on data about the user. We talk about a lot of personalization and customization. There's nothing really standard about it. All these companies and applications you described, they're very unique in how you experience and use them. They do require a lot of custom development. So I think a lot of these tools that are maybe off the shelf, again, it goes back into how much does it help you differentiate or not. And if these are implemented really effectively, they can be very a strong competitive advantage. So there is some significant investment that's required for these types of systems. What do you think about enterprises and how they should approach maybe internal systems, or using it for their internal applications? Should they focus on user experience at that point and learning about how their employees are using applications?
Absolutely. If you're a system of record, it does not matter if you have a good UI UX. Salesforce, NetSuite, Workday, I can keep naming companies that have a terrible UX, but business
I love
processes are
Salesforce.
built around. Oh yeah, I'm sure you do. Just like all three of the people like you that like it. But for the rest of us who have taste buds and can see and smell things, they realize that it's awful and offensive. But that's okay, because it's fine that they're offensive, because they are just a system of record. When it comes to systems of experience, systems of engagement, you need that experience, because people are going to engage with you. People are going to use you every day. And the more delightful it is, the more likely you are to be sticky. The less delightful you are, the less likely you're going to be used every day. If it's a dreadful experience, I'm not going to use your stuff. And so super important that if you are in that category, you invest heavily in UI UX, and you make the design good, and you make it tasteful, and you make it simple to do the job, right? There's a good product methodology here called job speed on. And that's the kind of mindset you need to be in when you're thinking about building systems of engagement. Internal products, I think it's even more critical, because your organization should be building tools that are super delightful to your users, because you should know your users, because there is a finite number of them, right? You can discover the persona. It's not like a market. It's not like your Salesforce, where every organization on your planet might be able to use your solution. And so you have to design for the ubiquity and everybody. And it's a tragedy of the commons, right? Where you can't be everything to everyone, but you have to be. When you're building internal platforms, you don't have to be everything to everyone. You can build targeted, well-informed solutions that just work for you. And anything other than that, trying to create general frameworks and everything is, I think, irresponsible, because you can have such a targeted experience that can be very, very delightful and super effective in both engagement and user satisfaction.
I really find that fascinating. So let's talk about more of an emerging system that you and I are very excited about and have been talking about for years. This kind of space that we tend to spend most of our time in is around systems of intelligence, and it's a very fascinating topic. So describe what these types of systems do, what they are, and a little bit more color around it.
Yeah. So as we talk about systems of record, and even to limited systems of engagement, when people engage with those systems, when people start mastering records inside of these systems, they're creating data. And as organizations have begun digitally transforming, or are in the late stage of it, depending on how early they were in the process, the organizations have created gigabytes, terabytes, in some cases petabytes of data that they can now use to create intelligent systems. They can use things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, deep learning, in order to power systems that truly understand the context in which people are working. And when we say a system of intelligence, it is just that. It is the system that sits on top of the data created from systems of record or systems of engagement and helps create intelligence that allows people to do their jobs better, or in some cases completely automate jobs away. And this is emerging because, again, we're in inning one of SaaS. We have seen, if you come to SaaStr, if you come to events like this, you can see just how early we are. Systems of record still being created every day. The systems of engagement are relatively new companies, 3, 4, 5 years old. That's relatively nascent. And you're not even seeing a lot of systems of intelligence. And so, being in inning one, systems of intelligence are so new because the data just hasn't been there. So systems are going to help people change the way they operate, change the way they execute. I mean, that's the next inning of this, helping take all that data, all those gains from the digital transformation, and make them meaningful for organizations.
Yeah, I find this fascinating because it's like it's not replacing any systems of records, it's building upon them. And what I find fascinating is, using these new emerging technologies such as like machine learning to continuously update models and anticipate all this data, influence, optimize things in real time. I think that's the big difference. A lot of times you see these project management tools or any types of these systems of records, you have status meetings, but it's on old data. There's not real time. It's not, you don't have your finger on the pulse right then. It's just, backwards looking. But it's interesting though that you have some companies that from the ground up were built on intelligence, right? Like Google and Amazon. They drive their decisions based on the interactions of their users. So talk about how companies should really approach these types of intelligent systems. Should they be thinking about it from day one, or is this something you kind of layer in?
I think you layer it in. I actually think the natural evolution is going to look like a lot of systems of engagement that basically help people do their jobs in a dumb kind of way. Here's graphs, you figure out to do with it. You use your human intelligence to execute. But then as the data is going up and you're recording the actions and you're seeing how people act and you're seeing all that, you're collecting this rich data set. And over time, instead of just helping you do your job, it's starting to tell you how to do your job. And eventually, because robots replace all of us eventually, it's going to do your job for you. And I think there's going to be a natural evolution over time of systems of engagement, just systems of intelligence. And as that happens, the good companies will do that. The bad companies will remain systems of engagement and be outcompeted. But I do believe that even though that's how the natural evolution is going to have, there will be spaces where revolution occurs, right? So we talk about evolution, it's a gradual increase of capability. Revolution is we go from A to Z overnight. And that's going to occur too. And when that occurs, we're going to see some pretty massive jumps in innovation. And then I think those are the two modes that how you have to think about this. Do I have something here that's a system of engagement that I can evolve over time and get it to a system of intelligence? Or do I have to launch a small scale revolution and skip a step and just implement that system today, right? But remember, the one thing people jump to is everyone thinks they need AI. Everyone thinks that they need to invest in all this stuff, but they don't have the data to do it yet. And so you really have to do a data inventory. You really have to understand what you have and then go in and figure out what to implement, whether you can implement it. And if you can't, well, now you know what you need to do to be able to implement it. So it's a really good planning step in order to properly execute a system of intelligence.
What I find interesting about systems of intelligence is, you're essentially using like breadcrumbs from users to look at behaviors and track and feed it into a machine learning system, which then you use to create a predictive model, to understand what might happen. How viable is that? Is that really possible for us to gather this data and then make predictions about what outcomes might come from that?
Oh, absolutely, dude. Almost everything you look at is some sort of function of statistics. And while no machine learning to this day can definitively tell you anything, it can just give you the likelihood of an outcome. I think as we get more data, as we understand the world more, we're able to model that world. I mean, the thing people misunderstand about science, I think, or maybe it's just not widely understood this way, is science helps model the world through a series of equations, but it's still math at the end of the day. And once you understand that everything is math at the end of the day, that like gravity, chemistry, biology can all be modeled with mathematical formulas, then when you're there, machines can do the same thing. And whether or not we have the formula yet to model the world and the causes and effects that happen in it, that's yet to be seen. And then in a lot of cases, we absolutely don't. In some cases, we absolutely do. And so it's just going to be a matter of, do we have enough data to generalize a cause and effect type situation to be able to have a computer model it? And that's just what's going to come down to. And again, you're fighting the amount of data you need to be able to beat the system. And the more data you have, the more likely you are to create a conclusive equation that the machine can execute on. And that's all machine learning is. I mean, the one thing that it makes it sound so fancy, all machine's learning, all it's looking at is a priori knowledge, the data, and it is creating a post priori formula based on that data to basically say, hey, if X, Y, and Z is true, then the outcome's, 3. And if ABC is true, then the outcome is 2. And that's all it's doing, and just creating a formula saying, hey, if we put these inputs in, we get this output out.
I think what's interesting too is let's talk about the architecture, right? There's different ways to set this up. You've seen standalone systems, and I think, if correct me if I'm wrong, systems of intelligence tend to be more of connecting disparate systems across whatever tool that you're using. So you don't have to necessarily create these foundational pieces. That's what systems of records are. And because of the API economy, it makes it a lot more feasible. Is that true? And then, what's the limit here? Can we just continue to just
Keep building intelligence around various systems that we have, or do we need to maybe potentially build, other different types of infrastructure?
I think both is true. I think what you said is absolutely accurate, if not quite precise, but it's accurate enough to not go into the precise details there. It would take us hours to get into all that. But yes, the API economy, data being open, more processes being digitized, having digital systems involved in them, all of that, absolutely true on that side. And giving access to that data via APIs and everything as those become compromised. And I absolutely agree that there's a lot of things that won't necessarily be digital, right? We had a meeting to discuss things. Well, that doesn't create data. However, we are actually at a really interesting precipice. And that interesting precipice is meetings now are being recorded via Zoom and everything else. And the technology to understand what is being said and record it and keep it is getting much more mature. And if COVID did anything, it gave companies like Zoom, companies like Microsoft, companies like Google, a lot of data. Because where it used to be 80% of meetings were in person, for an entire year, almost exclusively, meetings were done over the internet. And so people had transcripts. People were able to analyze those transcripts. People can go in and find out, hey, when this was said, what occurred from it, and be able to put all that data together. And so some of this data that didn't exist, this infrastructure, as you call it, that didn't exist before, that were gaps in the data story, if you will, and the story arc of how jobs are done, that's quickly being eroded. And as we shift to this new way of working and things become more digital, I think those infrastructure pieces will fit in, and the systems will hit a Cambrian explosion of being able to access this data and understand the full picture. And so it's just going to make things better and better. And I don't think anyone's looking at that particular side effect yet of the amount of infrastructure that we've created that closed gaps in how people work and made them a lot more digital over the last year. And I don't think people are taking full advantage of it. I know Zoom is, I know Microsoft is, but startups, I don't think have quite jumped on that yet. But when they do, it's going to be huge.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Like, I'm also interested in just looking at if you're building a systems intelligence and you're being fed data from, let's say, Zoom, you're looking at Zoom data and you're making, intelligent decisions, you're manipulating and massaging this data. Isn't there some inherent risk relying on another system to feed you this data? What if Zoom goes down, or you want to switch off of Zoom to Google or whatever, and their data looks different? Do you have to start re-architecting your systems intelligence? Like, how does that work, and how can you mitigate this risk?
I don't think it's a risk at all. I think we live in such a digital world that, like, even if, well, okay, there's two things that you mentioned there. So to correct the record, machine learning models are not built in real time. If your machine model is built in real time, you don't have a very robust model. Most machine learning models, to be truly effective, absorb terabytes of data. They run trillions of calculations. It takes hours, if not days, to create a very robust model. Even on the highest compute farms, GPT-3, and they have a lot of resources given to them from Microsoft. They got like $1 billion from Microsoft. I think they said it took 7 days to build a GPT-3 model, right? Now, obviously, that's an extreme cutting edge example of a very robust model, but similar scales apply, because even though they have a lot of data and they're looking at the entire internet and everything else, it's crazy. Even if you cut that by 1/1000th, you still don't have $1 billion to spend on a compute farm like you do. So it's still going to take you roughly 7 days. And so when you think about that, even if Zoom goes down, you just happen to have a model that may lack a couple hours of data. But again, I don't think that's a game changer for people. So that kind of stuff isn't really a concern. The business risk is, well, what if Asana doesn't let you integrate with it, or Jira doesn't let you integrate with it? That's a bullshit concern. No company that has customers is going to stop them from letting things integrate. We are far past that point where people have gotten anti-competitive. In fact, the last company that tried to do this, Microsoft, got antitrusted and had to fire their CEO quite famously over this. Like, you can't do that. If you have an open API, customers are going to demand other systems integrate with it. We exist in an ecosystem world where digital solutions compete on their own merits in their own areas. And when they feel like they need to, the solution is using better use of their data, they either acquire it or they partner in a way that also makes it beneficial for them. In no way do people cut them off, because you won't have customers for very long, because someone's competitive advantage over you, and it's very silly to lose this way, is we let people integrate with us. Like, if that's how you're going to lose, like, that's a stupid way to lose a lot of money. And so I think we just live in a golden age of collaboration, a golden age of competition, and it's not really a concern from that perspective. The only concern I think people have is their data available such that you can build a system of intelligence. And if there is one, and there is, then you shouldn't worry about how they got the data, who they integrate with, everything, because it's just, in my mind, it's a non-starter, and it doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, it's all really fascinating. And maybe as a kind of final thought, and as we also wrap up SaaStr, today's the last day, when you think about all these systems, how should enterprises approach putting this all together? What do you think would be, just a good starting point? I'm sure they have all the types of record systems and engagement systems, and potentially they're thinking about these intelligent systems. Just, as a final thought, how should CIOs and CTOs and technology leaders be approaching all of this?
I think you need to do a data index. You need to understand what you have today, understand what you'll need, and start looking at problems that you want to solve, right? If you want to project revenue, then there's a set of data you need to do that, right? I'll tell you, if you don't have a revenue recognition schedule and a churn rate, you're not predicting revenue. You just can't, because we don't know when you're going to recognize the revenue for a contract. And then on the other side, if you don't know your churn, you don't know at what point people are going to churn out of that. And so you can't do a forecasting. So you have to look at the data you have, the systems that data lives in, how you're going to access it, where you're going to put it, so that you can answer your hard questions of your business, and then find out where your gaps are, right? And then go after it. But I think people recklessly just install systems because they feel like they need it. They feel like, hey, the more systems, the better. Personally, the least amount of software you can have, whether it's custom or not, is the best amount of software. Software sucks. And so you have to think about, what systems do I have? What systems do I need? What data, more importantly, do I have access to? And what kind of questions am I going to answer? What's the biggest question that if I answer today would make my business more competitive, right? And then work your way towards that, to either build the system, buy the system, or do some combination of both.
Thank you for listening. We'd love to get your thoughts about this episode. Leave us a comment and give us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Connect with us at skipless.com for more content like this.